Every man reaches a point where he cannot blame anyone else anymore. The childhood is in the past. The people who hurt him are gone or irrelevant. The circumstances have changed, and still, the same patterns, the same ceiling, the same version of himself, slightly older, showing up in every new situation and producing the same results. That recognition, when it finally comes, is the most important moment in a man's life. Not because it feels good, because it is the first honest thing he has said to himself in years. And honesty about where you actually are is the only starting point that leads anywhere real. The Stoic philosophers called this the discipline of ascent, the moment you stop reacting and start choosing. Stop being shaped by everything around you and start shaping yourself instead. It is not a feeling, it is a practice. And it starts with 7 principles that the most formidable men in history use not to fix their lives, but to fix the man living them. Most men approach self-improvement the way they approach home renovation. They paint the walls, they replace the furniture, they change what is visible, and the foundation underneath, the actual structure that determines everything built on top of it, stays exactly the same. The new paint cracks, the new furniture wears out, and they find themselves back in the same room, wondering why nothing holds. Dr. Carol Dweck at Stanford University studied thousands of individuals over decades to understand why some people change and others do not. Her conclusion was not about intelligence, willpower, or circumstances. It was about the level at which change was attempted. People who changed surface behaviors without changing their underlying belief architecture failed almost universally. People who changed their beliefs first found that behavior followed without the constant effort that surface-level change requires. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius understood this in the 2nd century. He did not write about changing his empire. He did not write about changing the people around him. In 12 books of private journals, written for no audience but himself, he wrote almost exclusively about changing his own perception, his own responses, his own internal architecture. He was the most powerful man in the world, and he spent his private hours not managing his power, but auditing himself. There is a reason most men never change, despite genuinely wanting to. The desire is real. The intention is real. But desire and intention operate at the level of consciousness, and most of what drives human behavior operates below that level entirely. Dr. Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia spent his career studying what he called the adaptive unconscious, the part of the mind that processes information and generates responses before conscious thought even begins. His research showed that the conscious mind has access to roughly 11 bits of information per second. The unconscious processes 11 million. You are not steering the car. You are a passenger who occasionally touches the wheel. There's a specific kind of man this describes. He is not failing by conventional measures. He has the income, the position, the surface markers of a life that works. But in private, in the conversations he has with himself at 2 in the morning, he knows the truth. That what he has built is a performance. That the version of himself everyone sees is a construction. And that the man underneath the construction has never actually been examined, improved, or trusted. That gap between the performance and the reality is where the real damage lives. And it compounds silently for years before it breaks through the surface. Fixing yourself first is not a motivational concept. It is a systems problem. And the 7 principles that follow are not inspiration. They are architecture. They change the structure underneath. And when the structure changes, everything built on top of it changes with it. Principle 1. You cannot see yourself clearly until you stop defending yourself. In 2015, Dr. Tasha Eurich at the University of Colorado conducted what became one of the most comprehensive studies on self-awareness ever published. She surveyed thousands of people across multiple countries, professions, and age groups. Her finding was striking. 95% of people believe they are self-aware. Actual testing placed the number closer to 10 to 15%. The gap between perceived self-knowledge and actual self-knowledge is one of the largest documented gaps in all of psychology. The reason is defense. The human ego is not designed to show you an accurate picture of yourself. It is designed to show you a picture you can live with. Every time reality presents evidence that contradicts your self-image, the ego steps in. It contextualizes. It explains. It finds the exception. It constructs a narrative where you remain essentially correct, and the fault lies elsewhere. This is not weakness. It is the default setting of every human mind, without exception. Epictetus, who was born a slave in the 1st century and became one of the most influential philosophers in history, identified this as the primary obstacle to growth. He called it the tyranny of opinion, specifically the opinion a man holds of himself. Until a man is willing to see himself as he actually is, not as he wishes to be or as he fears he might be, he cannot change anything real. He can only rearrange the surface. The application is uncomfortable and necessary. Take one area of your life that is not working. Not the area where you have the best excuse. The area where, if you are completely honest, the common factor in every failure is you. Write down what you actually did, not what you intended to do. What you actually said, not what you meant to say. What pattern appears across every instance. That pattern is not bad luck. It is data. And data is the only thing you can work with. The man who defends himself learns nothing. The man who examines himself becomes dangerous. The Stoics had a specific practice for this called evening review. Every night, Seneca wrote, a man should ask himself 3 questions before sleep. What did I do wrong today? What did I do well? What could I have done better? Not to punish himself, to see himself. The practice was not about guilt. It was about data collection on the only subject that actually matters, which is the man you are when no one is managing the image. Principle 2. Your identity is the ceiling. Change the identity, not the behavior. Dr. James Pennebaker at the University of Texas at Austin spent 30 years studying how language shapes identity. His research demonstrated something that seems simple, but has profound consequences. The words a person uses to describe themselves become the ceiling of what that person believes is possible for them, not metaphorically, neurologically. The brain organizes behavior around identity labels with the same precision it uses to organize physical movement. When a man says he is not disciplined, he is not describing a behavior pattern. He is issuing a neurological instruction. The brain receives that identity label and begins filtering experience to confirm it. Every instance of indiscipline gets registered. Every instance of self-control gets ignored or attributed to external factors. The identity is maintained at the expense of the evidence. Marcus Aurelius faced this directly. He inherited not just an empire, but an identity. The role of philosopher, student, reluctant ruler. Every entry in his private journal was an act of identity construction. He was not writing down what he had done. He was writing down what kind of man he was choosing to be, deliberately, repeatedly, until the identity he was constructing became more real to him than the one he had inherited. The Stoic method here is specific. You do not start with behavior. You start with the question of who you are choosing to be. Not who you have been, not who you feel like today. Who you are choosing to be. That choice, made deliberately and reinforced consistently, begins to reorganize everything downstream. The behaviors follow the identity. They do not precede it. Decide today what identity you are constructing, not what you want to achieve, who you are becoming. That single shift in framing changes the entire relationship between effort and result. Principle 3. The man who masters his attention masters his life. Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi at the University of Chicago spent decades studying what he called the phenomenology of optimal experience. His data, collected across cultures, professions, and demographics, produced one finding above all others. The quality of a man's life is the quality of his attention, not his circumstances, not his relationships, not his resources. What he consistently pays attention to determines not just what he notices, but what he becomes. The Stoics had a specific practice for this called prosocia, which translates roughly as attention to self. It was not meditation in the modern sense. It was a disciplined, continuous monitoring of where the mind was going, and a deliberate redirection when it went somewhere that did not serve the man's chosen direction. Epictetus described it as the most important practice a philosopher could undertake. Not reading, not debate. Watching where your attention goes without your permission. In modern neuroscience, this maps directly to research on the default mode network, the brain system that activates when attention is not directed. Dr. Matthew Killingsworth at Harvard tracked the real-time attention and happiness of thousands of people using smartphone-based sampling. His finding was precise. People were less happy when their minds were wandering than when they were focused, regardless of what they were focused on. Attention is not just productive. Directed attention is the mechanism of well-being itself. What you give your attention to grows. What you consistently ignore atrophies. This is not philosophy. It is neuroscience. The brain physically reinforces the pathways that are used and dismantles the ones that are not. You are literally building yourself with your attention every single day. The question is whether you are doing it deliberately or by default. Principle 4. Stop trying to feel differently. Change what you do first. One of the most persistent myths about personal change is that it must begin with feeling, that you need to feel motivated before you act, feel ready before you begin, feel confident before you commit. This belief is not just wrong. It is the single most effective way to ensure that nothing ever changes. Dr. William James at Harvard, writing in the 1890s, identified what he called the action-emotion sequence. He proposed, against the intuition of his time, that action precedes emotion rather than following it. That a man does not act because he feels courageous. He feels courageous because he acted. The feeling is the result of the behavior, not its prerequisite. 100 years later, Dr. Amy Cuddy at Harvard Business School confirmed this in research on what she called presence. Her studies demonstrated that adopting specific physical postures for as little as 2 minutes measurably changed cortisol and testosterone levels, the biological markers of confidence and stress. The body changed the mind. The action changed the feeling, not the other way around. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, taught that virtue is not a feeling or an aspiration. It is a practice. It is what you do repeatedly, under conditions that make doing it difficult. The man who waits to feel like doing the right thing will wait forever. The man who does the right thing, regardless of how he feels, discovers over time that feeling and action have aligned, because he trained the feeling by training the action. Do not wait to feel different. Act differently. The feeling follows. It always does. This principle alone, if you apply it to one area of your life this week, will produce more actual change than months of analysis, planning, and intention. Because intention without action is just a story you tell yourself about who you are going to be. Action without feeling is how you actually become that person. Principle 5. Your reactions are the map. Follow them to the source. Every disproportionate reaction you have is a signal, not about the situation that triggered it, about something inside you that has not been examined. The man who explodes over a small slight is not reacting to the slight. He is reacting to something the slight touched that was already there, already loaded, already waiting. The trigger is never the real issue. The trigger is just the finger that finds the wound. Dr. John Gottman at the University of Washington spent 40 years studying emotional responses in relationships. He identified what he called flooding, the state where emotional arousal becomes so intense that rational processing shuts down entirely. His data showed that flooding responses are almost never proportionate to the immediate stimulus. They are disproportionate because they are not responses to the present. They are responses to the accumulated past, activated by a current event that pattern matches to an older wound. This is where dark psychology becomes self-knowledge rather than manipulation. The same mechanisms that make a man controllable by others, his unexamined wounds, his hidden fears, his identity threats, are the mechanisms he uses to control himself when he refuses to examine them. Every unexamined reaction is a lever. The man who has not mapped his own levers will eventually find that someone else has. Because predictable reactions are always exploitable, whether by a negotiating opponent, a manipulative colleague, or a relationship partner who has learned exactly which words produce which responses. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this directly in his journals. He described the practice of asking himself, after any significant emotional reaction, what assumption was underneath the reaction. Not what happened. What did he believe had to happen for this to feel threatening? That question, pursued honestly, leads directly to the belief structure that is generating the reaction. And a belief structure that can be seen can be changed. A belief structure that remains invisible continues to run the show indefinitely. Your strongest reactions are not weaknesses to be suppressed. They are maps to the exact locations where the real work needs to happen. The man who follows those maps, honestly and without self-protection, finds the source of patterns that have been running his life for decades. And finding the source is the only way to change the pattern rather than just managing it. Principle 6. Discipline is not punishment. It is the structure that creates freedom. The word discipline comes from the Latin disciplina, which means instruction, knowledge, a system of rules. It has nothing to do with punishment or deprivation. It is a structure, and structure for a human being is not a cage. It is what makes directed movement possible. Without structure, energy dissipates. With it, energy compounds. Dr. Roy Baumeister at Florida State University spent years researching what he called ego depletion, the finding that self-control draws on a limited resource that diminishes with use. His research showed that the most self-disciplined people were not the ones who exercised the most willpower. They were the ones who had structured their environment and habits so that willpower was required as rarely as possible. The discipline was in the architecture, not in the moment-to-moment effort. Cato the Younger, the Roman statesman and Stoic who lived in the 1st century before the Common Era, was famous for practices that seemed like punishment, but were understood by those who knew him as liberation. He walked barefoot in cold weather. He fasted regularly. He slept on the ground when others slept in comfort. Not to suffer, to prove to himself that his comfort wasn't in charge of him, that he could function, think clearly, and act decisively regardless of physical conditions. His discipline was not self-denial, it was the systematic elimination of dependency. Seneca wrote in his letters to Lucilius that the man who does not know where he is going does not benefit from any wind. Structure is direction made physical. It is not about controlling every moment. It is about having enough architecture in place that the default behavior, the behavior that happens when motivation disappears and circumstances are difficult, is still the right behavior. That is the only kind of discipline that holds under real pressure. Not the discipline you perform when you feel strong. The discipline that runs automatically because it has been built into the structure of your days. The man without structure is a slave to his impulses. Every decision costs him energy because every decision starts from zero. The man with structure has already made most decisions in advance. His energy goes to what matters. His freedom is not the absence of structure. His freedom is what the structure makes possible. Principle 7. The version of you that you are building is built in the moments no one sees. There is a concept in Stoic philosophy called the inner citadel. Marcus Aurelius used this phrase to describe the part of a man that external circumstances cannot reach. The part that is built in private, tested in difficulty, and revealed under pressure. It is not given. It is constructed. And it is constructed exclusively in the moments when no one is watching and there is no reward for doing the right thing. The inner citadel is also the only protection a man has against the people who will test him. Because every environment contains people who will probe for weakness, consciously or not. They will test your reactions with small provocations. They will test your consistency by watching what you do when no one is enforcing anything. They will test your identity by applying pressure to the points where your self-image is fragile. A man who has built his inner citadel in private over time, through thousands of small choices made when nothing was at stake, is genuinely unshakable when something is. Not because he performs composure, because composure is what he has become. Dr. Angela Duckworth at the University of Pennsylvania spent years studying what she called grit, the combination of passion and perseverance that predicts achievement across domains more reliably than talent or intelligence. Her most consistent finding was about private behavior. The individuals who achieved at the highest levels were not the ones who performed best when it mattered most. They were the ones who maintained their standards when it did not matter at all. In the practice session, in the off-season, in the Tuesday morning when no one was recording and nothing was at stake. Every choice you make when no one is watching is a vote for the man you are becoming. Not a significant vote. Not a vote that changes anything in the moment, but a vote that accumulates. Dr. Duckworth's research confirmed what every serious practitioner in every domain already knew intuitively. Character is not revealed under pressure. It is built in private and revealed under pressure. What comes out in the crisis is what was put in during the quiet. The man who cuts corners in private eventually has no corners left. The man who holds his standard in private eventually has a standard that holds under any conditions. There is no shortcut to this. There is no version of it that happens in public or for an audience. The inner citadel is built alone, in the dark, one choice at a time. Now you have the 7 principles. Here is what you do with them before this week ends. The first action is to identify one pattern in your life that is repeated across different contexts and different people. Write it down in one sentence, not the story around it, the pattern itself. That single sentence is more valuable than any analysis you have ever done about why your life looks the way it does. The second action is to audit the identity labels you use about yourself, the things you say after the words I am. Write down 5 of them. Then ask for each one, is this a description or is this a decision? The ones that are decisions disguised as descriptions are the ones that are running your ceiling. The third action is to track your attention for one day. Not your time, your attention. Every hour, write down what your mind was actually on. Not what you were doing, what you were thinking about. At the end of the day, you will have a precise map of what you are actually building, because you are always building something with your attention, whether you intend to or not. The fourth action is to do one thing this week that you have been waiting to feel ready for. Not when the feeling comes. Now. Before the feeling. The action is the thing that produces the feeling. Waiting for readiness is waiting for a bus that does not run on that route. The fifth action is to choose one private standard that you will hold this week, regardless of whether anyone sees it or rewards it. One thing you will do or refuse to do because of who you are choosing to be, with no audience and no recognition. That choice, made and kept, is the first brick of the inner citadel. The man who fixes himself first does not need to fix everything else. When the foundation changes, the structure above it adjusts. The relationships change because he changed. The results change because his responses changed. The ceiling lifts because the identity underneath it changed. Everything external is a reflection of the internal architecture. Change the architecture, and the reflection follows without effort. The next video is already loaded. It goes deeper into the one force that destroys more men than failure ever could, and the specific method the Stoics used to eliminate it permanently. Watch it now.